Well, I'm Dr. Richard Downs, and I'm going to give a lecture on nitric oxide and how it relates to mouth rinses. So let me share my screen with you in just a second here. Okay, the name of this lecture is Nasal Health, the Nitrogen Cycle, the Nitric Oxide Cycle, and the Enterosalivary System Considerations, and an analysis by myself. The reason I'm presenting this is because I've been asked a number of times about the effect of mouth rinses on our nitric oxide supply in the body. As a disclosure, I'm Richard Downs, and I'm one of the co-founders of the OraCare company, oracareproducts.com. So I do have a financial interest in what I'm saying, but I think that the information I give you will be interesting nonetheless. So let's talk first about the nitrogen cycle. I'm not going to show you the video. I'm just going to chat a little bit about it myself. But nitrogen is an inert but essential for life element in our atmosphere. And it isn't available to plants or animals taken directly from the air. So how do we overcome that problem? It's been done through the use of bacteria, and we'll show you that in a moment. In our system, nitrogen is absorbed from the air by plants and animals. 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. So the nitrogen molecule is labeled N2. So here is a little schematic of the nitrogen cycle. As you can see, the atmospheric nitrogen is N2. If you go to the left there, you'll see that we have nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria. And these nitrogen-fixing bacteria convert the nitrogen with a process called ammonification. And these nitrogen-fixing bacteria are also present in legumes of certain plants. When ammonium is formed, it goes through a process called nitrification with another bacteria action. By the way, the ammonium is NH4. With nitrification, the ammonium is turned into nitrites, which is NO2. And then further bacteria influence on the nitrites creates nitrates, NO3. These nitrates are then assimilated by plants through the roots and brought up into the leaves and the stems, and it's used to make chlorophyll and the nucleic acids that are in the plant. And then when these plants and when the animals eat the plants and the plants and animals die, they decompose, again producing ammonium, and that cycle starts over again. The ammonium is recycled into this system. So there's a mini cycle in the middle. And some of the nitrates are then converted by other bacteria called denitrifying bacteria. And these bacteria convert that back into nitrogen, which goes back up into the air. So that's the nitrogen cycle. But humans have their own nitrogen cycle, and we're going to go through that in just a moment. We are part of the animal cycle, of the nitrogen cycle, but we also have a nitrogen cycle of our own. Now I'm going to first start with some shocking statements. And these statements you're going to need to think about as we go through this lecture, and I'll help maintain them as I go throughout the lecture. 1, rinsing with an antimicrobial mouth rinse can lower your blood pressure and balance your oral microbiome. I'm sure you've not heard that before. What you've heard is the opposite. So we're going to maintain how that happens in just a little while. Here's another one that might shock you. Snoring helps infuse the lungs with nitric oxide, which is good for you. You know that snoring is not good for you, but there may be one instance, a minor instance, where it actually helps produce nitric oxide for us to breathe. Bad breath lowers blood pressure. You know, those bad breath gases that we have in our mouths actually can lower blood pressure. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Hot dogs and bacon can be good for you. Now, I know hot dogs and bacon, and you eat a lot of that, is not good for you. I'm making an extreme statement here. We're talking about the nitrates in there that we're talking about to help make nitrogen, a nitric oxide in your body. Green leafy vegetables in your diet will supply you with enough nitrates to exceed the World Health Organization recommended levels by 550%. And last of all, antioxidant supplements in the diet consistently show an increase in cancer rates and worsening of cancer conditions. These are all statements that seem to go contrary to what you've heard in popular media and lectures. Now, there's been a lot of bandwagon marketing around nitric oxide lately, and I will show you a few of the supplements on the market. This is one of a friend of mine in Arizona. He's taking this nitric oxide supplement. And you can see there's a little bit of vitamin C in this and some magnesium. But if you look down further and you go down to the bottom, you'll see some actual sodium nitrite. See the nitrite here? It's right there. And that sodium nitrite is a pretty good thing. So we can get some extra nitric oxide in our bodies through some of these supplements. Here's another one that I want you to look at, and we're going to specifically address the reduction of oral bacteria that reduce nitrates to nitrites in your saliva. And so if you have a nitrate, which is NO3, that enters your saliva, and the bacteria that are reducing it are there, they will change it from nitrate to a nitrite, and then you swallow it. And I'll explain the cycle of that in just a little bit. It's a little more complex than what you might see. It doesn't do it directly with the food, okay? We'll show you how that comes back to the mouth in a little bit. This slide comes from Rachel Carver, and I want to just acknowledge her for that. She had a great lecture on nitric oxide, and I listened to it, and we're going to use some of her slides in my presentation. I hope she doesn't mind. You'll see two of them here, the Berkeley Life Professional Nitric Oxide Supplement, and then the Neo 40. Now, the thing about this is that the Berkeley Life Professional product has an NO3 in it, which is nitrate. And the Neo 40 has the nitrite in it, like the last slide I showed. So why would we want to know the difference between those two? Well, I'll tell you in a moment. So in the advertisements for these products, you'll see that they help quickly increase your body's nitric oxide from the makers of Super Beets, and beets, by the way, are a good source of nitric oxide supplementation. And they claim they're the #1 pharmacist recommended beet brand according to ProVoice, their survey in 2022. It's clinically tested and patented. It's created by the human N-based on exclusive patent licenses from the University of Texas. And they're the only company that hold that exclusive license. So they just go through, and Neo 40 is what is being recommended here. One of the things about Neo 40 is that it contains methylated tetrahydrofolate to support the nitric oxide production of producing actives in the formula. And by the way, this is a nitric NO2 formula. So I'm going to talk to you why we'd want to do NO2 if you have any kind of reduction of bacteria in your mouth that do that kind of reducing activity. Berkeley Life has a sodium nitrate in it, and also it has a nitric oxide test strip, which is kind of nice to have a test strip. So that would be nice. Neo 40 has sodium nitrite in it. That's the NO2. These supplements may be good as we age because we lose mitochondria that make nitric oxide. Okay, mitochondria make nitric oxide. Many of you might not have known that, but that's how it's done. And by the way, they usually make that from NO2. So let's just stop a second here and say that if you had a mouth rinse like chlorhexidine that reduced the number of bacteria in your mouth that actually reduced nitrate to nitrite, you'd want to use a supplement that didn't depend on the bacteria in the mouth to get your nitrite into the stomach. You understand? So the bacteria in the mouth produce nitrite, then you swallow it, and then the nitrite with the NO2 in the stomach and in the gut is converted to nitric oxide. So you don't need nitrate in that situation. The bacteria is not needed as much as we would with a nitrate type of supplement. Okay. Vitamin C may help with the nitrosamines and nitrosamides. Now, that's just an aside. The first slide I showed you with the vitamin C in it would help suppress the amount of nitrosamines and nitrosamides, which are cancer-producing byproducts of the nitrates. And so nitrates are inherently present in all plant materials, especially vegetables and forage crops and beer. The interest in nitrate consumption is due to the subsequent conversion of nitrates to nitrites, which are of greater concern in the formation of N-nitrosyl compounds. So the endogenous conversion of nitrate to nitrite is a significant source of exposure to nitrites. So nitrates are good for us, but on the other hand, they're more likely to produce nitrosamines and nitrosamides. You understand? So it's just something to think about. This is not all black and white material that we're talking about here. However, nitrate intake in conjunction with vitamin C and possibly E may inhibit the endogenous nitrosamine formation, so that might have a protective effect. So that's why I introduced that particular dietary supplement that my friend in Arizona shared with me. Okay, that comes from this paper, the development of estimates of dietary nitrates, nitrites, and nitrosamines for use with short Willett food frequency questionnaire. And I read that article, and that was a very good one. Current thoughts on mouth rinse effects on the tongue commensal bacteria. Now we're going to get into that. And by the way, the reason I got into this lecture is because I was at a seminar more than a year ago. One of my friends who loves my mouth rinse presented it to one of the lecturers there, one of the, a fairly well-known KOL, and he wouldn't use it because he was afraid of its effect on commensal bacteria, reducing the bacteria count in his mouth and raising his blood pressures. So it does require us, and it does deserve attention. All studies related to this subject have been used to condemn all antimicrobial rinses, and I think that's a mistake. So let's do the introduction. Most key opinion leaders' comments on this subject have fallen into what I call the scorched earth evangelist category. Scorched earth evangelists are an all or nothing type of approach to this subject. And how it affected me, it was unexpected. I was actually taken aback because I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to it before that. And so it spurred me on to do this research. I would expect key opinion leaders to be more discerning, though, and not just repeating attention-grabbing sound bites. Now, I'm not claiming this person did. I'm just saying, because he's not lecturing on the subject. So he just had a personal concern. So, and it was good that he mentioned that to me. And why would I care? Good oral hygiene saves lives. We've had good oral hygiene lectures and reasons why we have good oral hygiene and good body hygiene for centuries now, 2 to 3 centuries, and it has saved a lot of lives. So are we going to abandon that right now? Even our oral hygiene. We need to think about this in a critical and nuanced way. And then simple, let's take a cool-headed view of the facts, and I'm going to do that now. So what do I mean by scorched earth evangelist? These statements: I don't believe in killing all the bacteria. Well, yeah, that's a scorched earth statement, and I don't agree with killing all the bacteria either. So the balance of the microbiome should be preserved. Yeah, I agree with that as well. I don't believe in the scorched earth approach to therapy. I've had people say that to me. That's why they call them. That's where I got the idea of a scorched earth, because people are calling any mouth rinse that you use that's antimicrobial as a scorched earth approach to therapy, and it's not. Antimicrobial rinses raise your blood pressure. No, they don't. Not all of them do. Okay. I'm going to talk to you about that in a moment. So if something is popular and sounds like common sense, people will repeat it without inspection. So Dr. Oz, I saw a show presented by him a few years ago. He brought up the fact that mouth rinses raise blood pressure by an average of 3 points on his show, and he thought that was significant. He was actually quoting a study that came out of Houston, Texas, and I will present that paper here in a little bit. I think it's the one that most people are citing right now on their attack on mouth rinses. Then you have people online, other dentists, saying things like this: do not use mouthwash, just a blanket statement. Another scorched earth evangelist. He states that nitric oxide comes from the bacteria in the sinuses. Bacteria in the sinuses. He stated that 25% of our body's nitric oxide comes from the mouth. And he stated that all mouth rinses are a problem. All three statements are incorrect. This is Dr. Kevin Stock that I saw online, and an email also that I got from him. Nitric oxide in the paranasal sinuses. This comes from a study by Lundberg, and it talks about inducible nitric oxide synthase, cyclic guanosine monophosphate produced nitric oxide done by cilia continuously. Nitric oxide is aerocrine in this situation. And what it means by aerocrine is that the nitric oxide is produced and it goes into the air, and then it works on a distant organ. So some people are labeling it not a paracrine or any kind of other endocrine, but actually aerocrine. So that's kind of an interesting statement. An equal number of fringe health supplement sellers like Stephen Grundy, MD, and I see him all over the internet. I get spam from him all the time. They've latched on to this latest mouth rinse study in Texas, and now a popular bandwagon citation article evangelizing the dangers of mouth rinses, destroying nitric oxide production, calling it bad oral hygiene practice, and instead touting pseudoscience like oil pulling. This is a quote from grapeo.com, and it was it's a title. The title of the article is "Quacks Selling Harmful Supplements." In the news, it's in Newsworthy on Grapeo, June 10th, 2021. You can find it on YouTube on this link. So aerocrine nitric oxide. This is the article that we talked about from Lundberg. And I highly recommend that you read it. It's a very excellent article. Okay. I'm going to kind of make my screen a little bit smaller here so I can read all the screen, exit full screen. Okay. So nitric oxide synthase is identical or very closely related to the human inducible nitric oxide synthase. However, the regulation of sinus nitric oxide synthase expression seems to be different fundamentally from what has earlier been described as inducible nitric oxide synthase. Sinus nitric oxide seems to be unique, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sinus nitric oxide as well as the oral effects on that. Nitric oxide concentrations in the nasal airway and the sinuses may help to protect against airborne infectious agents. I think they do. Inhaled endogenous nitric oxide derived from the upper airways may be involved in the regulation of pulmonary function in man. Nitric oxide will reach the lower airways of the lungs with inspired air at levels that are especially high during nasal breathing. And what they're saying there is that if you breathe through your nose, you're going to get more nitric oxide, quite a bit more. And not only does it go in and help you, but it opens up the alveoli, the bronchi, and it actually helps bring oxygen into the blood in the lower parts of the lung. places that aren't actually always reached without nasal breathing. The involvement of the autogenous nitric oxide in regulation of pulmonary function may represent a novel physiological principle, namely that of an enzymatically produced airborne messenger. That's why we call it an aerocrine. A continuous production of nitric oxide takes place in the acidic stomach through chemical reduction of the nitrite present in swallowed saliva. This is the first evidence of a non-enzymatic nitric oxide production in humans. A large production of nitric oxide takes place in the paranasal sinus from a constitutively expressed steroid-resistant inducible-like, they call it inducible-like, nitric oxide synthase in the epithelial cells. So it's like an inducible nitric oxide, but not quite the same. A lot of cyclic GMP is involved in this production in the nose. So I'm going to ask these questions. Do all antimicrobial rinses raise the blood pressure? Was the most recent study unflawed that we're going to talk about? Do other studies confirm these conclusions? Are we going to abandon the wisdom in general hygiene learned over hundreds of years? Are we going to abandon that? I believe the answers to all these questions is no. Let's go back to the larger screen here just to get enter full screen. Okay. So these are the revelations I came to, a couple of them anyway. What you will realize at the end of this lecture, what? Almost all studies show only chlorhexidine increased blood pressure. 2, this is a nuanced, because even chlorhexidine lowered blood pressure in certain hygiene practices. No one knows why, not even the people that did this study. Okay, let's go to that. Sources of nitric oxide, and we should probably discuss this a little bit. There's the intrinsic nitric oxide. They're endothelial nitric oxide synthase, and they're from the vascular endothelium. The endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the neuronal nitric oxide synthase, and the inducible immune or nitric oxide synthase. Nitrites, the NO2s, are actually reduced or in the tissue to NO. Okay. And I think they're doing that through cyclic GMP. Then there's the extrinsic system of nitric oxide, which we're talking about now, the enterosalivary system, and that's where the nitrates from your saliva are reduced to nitrites. Then it's swallowed, goes into the intestine, and then it's produced. Then it produces nitric oxide. Okay. Now these reactions can go in both directions. So you can have oxidation or you can have reduction. So this is a redox reaction, another type of redox reaction. And you can see that nitrites can be reduced to nitric oxide. Nitrites are in the middle here. Nitrates can be reduced to nitrites. Okay. But actually this arrow should be pointing the other direction because they can actually go that direction too. Both of these arrows could go to the right. Nitrites also, by the way, can relax blood vessels in hypoxic conditions, just like nitric oxide can do. So NO2 can do some of the things that NO does. Okay. Now, this is another slide I got from Rachel Carver. I think it's a really excellent slide that she showed. Nitric oxide is made from these macrophage 1 and macrophage 2 alternative pathways and the classical pathways. Okay. Actually, the inhibit system is where the arginine, by the way, nitric oxide is made from arginine. So it's, as you can see, the inducible nitric oxide converts arginine into nitric oxide. Okay. And then you have add citrulline. You can have the different types of reactions, A, B, and C, the classic pathway for the production of the pro-inflammatory molecules as well. So this is the pro-inflammatory system over here on the left. And you can see the interleukin 1b, interleukin 6, interleukin 12, and tumor necrosing factor alpha. And on the right, you will see the macrophage 2 reaction, where you can see that there's actually an anti-inflammatory reaction on the right. And you can see over there, the Th2 immune system is stimulated. And also you can see that the cytokines are more anti-inflammatory. Although these cytokines also could go back and forth between inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. So it's not as black and white as it looks in this slide. But in the macrophage, which are a type of white blood cell in our immune system, nitric oxide kills bacteria and inhibits the replication of viruses. Macrophages and nitric oxide action are part of our innate immune response. This is a rapid, general, and non-specific response. That is the same for any pathogen organism that causes disease. So this is a it is an innate response. Okay, so let's go ahead to the next slide. This is another a slide from Rachel Carver. Oops, back here. Nitric oxide is synthesized in the endothelial cells and macrophages. So there are 2 types of nitric oxide synthase: endothelial, expressed at low levels in endothelial cells, and inducible, is induced when macrophage activation by cytokines. And then you can see the tumor necrosing factor alpha and the interferon gamma on the bottom there that can do the inducible nitric oxide. Saline is found in is a protein found in food, and is crucial membrane protein essential as a nitrate co-transporter. So this is just an aside. It is found in all tissues, especially in the parotid gland. That's why I mention it, because we're going to talk about the mouth in a minute. It's also in the brain, kidney, liver, pancreas, thyroid, and submandibular glands. So it's something that we need to pay attention to. Now, here's a study that I think is important from Norman, and it is concentration of plasma nitrate in saliva is part of the enterosalivary circulation of dietary nitrate. Approximately, now this is where that 25% came from that dentist talked about. This figure does not mean what he thought it meant, okay? So approximately 25% of ingested nitrate is secreted in saliva, where some 20% of that is then converted to nitrite by the commensal bacteria on the tongue. Then the nitrites are absorbed in the intestines and converted to nitric oxide. Now, let's take a little figure this out. So the 25% that was mentioned before is not nitric oxide. The 25% is, let's say you eat a nice green leafy lettuce salad, okay? 25% of the nitrates in that lettuce is now gone into the stomach and converted into nitrate absorption into your bloodstream, and that nitrate comes back to your mouth, to the salivary glands, and is now secreted in saliva. So you get 25% of the nitrates from your diet are secreted back to your mouth in the saliva. And then 20% of that, okay, 20% of the 25%, or around 5 to 8% of that nitrate intake is then converted to nitrite by the commensal bacteria on the tongue. Then it's swallowed again. And then the nitrite is then absorbed in the intestines, and some of it's converted in your stomach to nitric oxide, as we mentioned before. Okay. Sources of nitric oxide from L-arginine by enzymes. So I just kind of gave you this slide before. The epithelial nitric oxide synthase, the neuronal nitric oxide synthase, and the inducible nitric oxide synthase. Nitrates are converted to NO2. By the way, this little section over here, endogenous production of nitric oxide is also adaptable. It increases in hypoxia. In other words, when you have sleep apnea, and if you get a reduction in oxygen intake, you're actually going to produce more nitric oxide. Something you need to think about if you're in sleep medicine. Okay. All right, I want you to remember these two terms, pleiotropism and redundancy. Pleiotropism, these principles exist in all human physiology systems, and they're very much important because of the adaptability of our body as human beings. Pleiotropism stands for, let's take a cytokine, let's take or some other type of molecule. Sometimes interleukin-10 can be inflammatory, and sometimes it can be, most of the time, it's anti-inflammatory. Sometimes a molecule will have many different actions throughout the body, multiple actions in different tissues that it touches. So it may have a multiple function. Redundancy, on the other hand, says that sometimes different molecules will have the same function. In other words, if one molecule will produce nitric oxide and another one will produce nitric oxide, they both produce nitric oxide through different pathways. And so redundancy, in other words, nitric oxide can be gained through all those three different systems that I just mentioned, as well as our enterosalivary condition. So there's a redundancy built into our system for nitric oxide. Let's go to the citations on mouth rinses. Let's see what they say. Literature study designs and what we know and don't know are important here. Citations on mouth rinses. There was a 2015 article from Australia, and it was quoted by Dr. Rachel Carver, and she just mentioned that one, so I looked it up, read it. Antibacterial mouth rinse blunts oral nitrate reduction and increases blood pressure in treated hypertensive men and women. So she brought that one up. Comes from Australia. And when you read the article, it is about chlorhexidine. Okay, just want you to understand it's chlorhexidine that's gone there. All right. The conclusions of the article from Australia said this: antibacterial mouthwash over 3 days resulted in higher systolic blood pressure by 2.3 millimeters of mercury, but not the diastolic blood pressure. That stayed the same. Okay. Cyclic GMP was not affected. The conclusions of this study was this: interruption of the nitrite NO pathway through the use of antibacterial mouthwash was paralleled by a small elevation in systolic blood pressure in treated hypertensive men and women. Okay, got it. Now let's go to the nitric oxide plays a role in the aerocrine messenger system, as we mentioned before, between the upper and lower respiratory tracts, reducing pulmonary vascular resistance and facilitating alveolar oxygen transfer to the bloodstream. Its physiological role in arterial blood oxygenation could be involved in speech and singing, or be activated by physiological snoring during sleep. I just thought I'd bring this up because we mentioned it earlier, didn't we? That snoring could maybe release nitric oxide. Well, here, this study says it does. As a matter of fact, in this study called Sinusology, they found that certain humming and certain pitches of humming would release nitric oxide from your paranasal sinuses into your breathing apparatus. So this vibration at a certain pitch can be maximized. And by the way, you makes you wonder then when some of these yoga practices and this humming for health might be coming from some actual factual background in physiology. Okay. In the nose, nitric oxide is continuously made in the sinuses without bacterial assistance. So the dentist that mentioned bacteria in the nose making nitric oxide has got it confused with the mouth. Okay. The cells there use cyclic guanosine monophosphate to produce it. Cyclic GMP is involved in tissue production as well. Now, let's think about this a minute. Your mouth receives nitrates from your saliva, and the bacteria convert that with the bacteria in your mouth to nitrites, and then you swallow it. How on earth would you think that would work in the nose? We're not depending on swallowing nasal secretions for nitric oxide enhancement. It's silly. The bacteria in the nose are not producing nitrites like the tongue bacteria are. Okay. And this is important when we talk about nasal sprays, which I'm developing right now for helping people get more nitric oxide from their nose. That's coming later. You'll see more about it in the future. All right. So let's look at this study, and this is the one that most people are studying from Texas. The frequency of tongue cleaning impacts the human microbiome composition and enterosalivary circulation of nitrate. Now, look at that title very closely. The frequency of tongue cleaning impacts the microbiome. Think about that. That's the top line, tongue cleaning. All right. So this is a good study. I want everybody to read it because it's very important. But there are some things I want to show you about this study that are very, I think, have been taken out of context. No fault of the authors, but it's been taken out of context. But there are some study designs that I think are serious. Okay, here's what the study designs show me. I read the study design carefully, and this is what I found out. As needed, mouthwash or mouth rinsing. 5 participants were doing mouth rinsing. They had, by the way, they had 26 participants, okay? 5 of them were using mouth rinses as needed before the study. Okay. And that was 19% of them. Once per day users, in other words, people that use them every day, at least once per day, there were 16 participants that were using a mouth rinse once per day, or 59% of the participants in this study already were using a mouth rinse, an antimicrobial mouth rinse. And of the remaining, twice per day, 6 participants were using mouth rinses twice per day for 22%. And the ingredients of these mouth rinses being used were 1, essential oils. There were 11 participants for 41%. Cetyl pyridinium chloride, 10 participants were using that, or 37%. And finally, no response, 6 participants, or 22%. Okay, so they didn't know what the last 6 people were using for mouth rinses. They were using mouth rinses, but they didn't know what they were using. Okay. All right. So there were 26 total participants in this study. 1 dropped out. So you need to know that too. It's at most it could be called a pilot study. 3.12% chlorhexidine gluconate was used, and they were instructed to rinse with a ½ ounce for 30 seconds twice per day as part of their normal oral hygiene in morning and in the evening. Subjects were asked to discontinue the use of any other mouth rinse for the next 7 days. Okay, so they would stop them from using the mouth rinse they had and put them on chlorhexidine. And by the way, it wasn't chlorhexidine either, it was Paradex. And Paradex has chlorhexidine and alcohol in it. So let's just be clear, this was Paradex, okay? No periodontal disease was present, and pressures over 130 of blood pressure these people were excluded. Many did tongue cleaning, but no distinction was made as to brushing the tongue or whether they were scraping the tongue. 23 cleaned their teeth daily, cleaned their tongue daily. 4 did so less than weekly. So you might say that the 4 that did so less than weekly may not do it at all. I don't know. No criteria was used to screen toothpaste in this study. So Colgate removed triclosan on February 2019. Think about that. And also they removed it from their mouth rinses. They now use stannous fluoride. This study was published, the March study, it was March 1, 2019. Let's go back a minute and show you that. See there? 1 March 2019 is when this article was published. It's 1 month after Colgate stopped using triclosan in their products. Okay, so we don't know. Many of these people might have been using Colgate with triclosan, and we don't know. Ages of participants was 20 to 50, and there was no screening for sleep disorders. Remember, I told you that people with sleep disorders actually produce more nitric oxide if they're suffocating. Okay, all right. Not only is the microbiota personalized, but is also changed with age. You need to know that age changes your microbiota. My microbiota in my mouth is different now at 74 than it was at 20. And in this study, you can see that they used a study that came up with this conclusion. Of the 27 sites that they studied in the mouth, in 7 to 9 healthy adults, the microbiota on 4 occasions, these results indicate that the microbiota was personalized. In other words, each person had their own microbiome. Remember pleiotropism and redundancy? Well, your microbiome is also personal. It's unique to you. So somebody designing your microbiome might be dangerous, okay? A simple question then. Would you not want to test patients who are not using a mouth rinse in a study? Is the study actually showing the other antibacterial rinses have no effect on the nitric oxide and blood pressure? You remember, all but 6 of them, or excuse me, almost all of them were using a mouth rinse before the study. So really, it sounds to me like they're saying that those mouth rinses had nothing to do with nitric oxide, doesn't it you? I mean, it makes sense to me. Okay, so they switched them from one mouth rinse to another, chlorhexidine. Here's the major findings of that Texas study. No significant correlations were found for any demographic of oral hygiene data except for tongue cleaning frequency. The R of 0.45 for correlation with tongue frequency cleaning was determined to be significant with a p-value of 0.03. P-values are a way that you statistically evaluate the ANOVA score on a subject to know if that a result is statistically significant or not. It's just a scientific term. Subjects who cleaned their tongue twice or more per day as part of their normal oral hygiene were more likely to have an increased systolic blood pressure during the use of chlorhexidine for 1 week. This is their conclusion. Subjects who cleaned their tongue twice per day were the most likely to have an increase in systolic blood pressure during the chlorhexidine use. It wasn't just the mouth rinse, it was the tongue cleaning. Wait a minute. Are they still using chlorhexidine? Yes, they are. The subjects who did not clean their tongue on a daily basis were more likely to have, get this, a decrease in systolic blood pressure. Let me just rephrase this for you. So there were 6 subjects that didn't clean their tongue. In those 6 subjects that didn't clean their tongue, they were more likely to have a decrease in systolic blood pressure. A decreased, not an increase. And that's with chlorhexidine. So was it the chlorhexidine or the tongue cleaning that raised the blood pressure? I mean, the chlorhexidine used alone lowered the blood pressure on those not cleaning the tongue. How did they explain that? Let's see if they explain that. Let's go ahead and see what they said. Here's what they said. Those who did not clean the tongue had more ammonia-producing bacteria, and those who cleaned had more Neisseria flavescens, nitrite reductase producing bacteria, leading to an actual nitric oxide production in the oral cavity. Therefore, they believe the ammonia producing bacteria or nitrate reductase producing bacteria steal nitrite away from the NO pathway. Okay, do you understand that? I don't. The ammonia producing nitrate reductase producing bacteria steal nitrite away from the NO pathway. Okay, that still doesn't explain why chlorhexidine reduced the blood pressure, does it? Doesn't say anything about blood pressure. NO produced this way could be breathed into the lungs for benefit, they said. Mouth breathers would have an advantage here, I think, but they did not. There was a little discussion here. A little aside thing that they mentioned that, a minor amount of nitric oxide was actually produced in the mouth. A little bit of NO, not just nitrite, but NO. And it's absorbed through the tissues under the tongue. Okay, fine. It wasn't very significant, and it was not a significant important thing for them to delve into. The statement that the ammonia producing nitrites did not explain the reduction in blood pressure with chlorhexidine. They did not say those who did not clean their tongue had high blood pressures. They did say people are highly adaptable, and they did say that in this study, as does Brian and Lascalzo. Okay, that's what they did. Now I agree with that. People are highly adaptable, so that's a good thing. They said that in that study from Texas. Here's some more findings. Chlorhexidine mouthwash does not eradicate viable bacteria on the tongue, but instead causes a transient loss of viable counts, and the recovery from chlorhexidine treatment is associated with increased bacterial metabolic activity. Listen to this. This Texas study is saying that when the people who scraped their tongue used chlorhexidine, when the bacteria came back, they came back with better bacterial metabolic activity, better. Differential abundance analysis identifies significant changes in some species in response to the treatment with chlorhexidine. In the zero cleaning cohort, that means the zero tongue cleaning, 3 species had significant changes in abundance, so they only affected 3 species when they chlorhexidine rinsed, while the 1 cleaning cohort had 10 changes in the bacterial count or cohort, and the people that were cleaning twice or scraping their tongue twice per day had 12 operational taxonomic units changes. The dynamics of recovery from chlorhexidine exposure are notable in that there was a rapid recovery in viable counts between 6 and 8 hours, which corresponded with a significant increase in nitrate reduction to nitrite in the tongue samples and richness. In other words, they're saying that, maybe if you rinsed once a week, you could get a lot of benefit from chlorhexidine. Isn't that what it's saying right there? That you're actually going to make your bacteria more robust and better nitrate reductase bacteria responsible for that. That's what they're saying, in my opinion. I mean, if you use it every day, it would be more detrimental. But in this case, they're saying that there was a good richness produced, and not a bacterial imbalance, but a bacterial balance being produced here. So are you wondering why such richness and recovery still produced higher blood pressures? I am. And the product noted for the substantivity, and this is a product noted for its substantivity, and a lot of mouth rinses don't have substantivity. These are 2 big blows to the scorched earth evangelist. All right, citations. So we've got Lundberg and Moncada and New and Tade and Benjamin and Lundberg, and all these people were cited in that Texas paper. So I went ahead and read all those papers. Okay, everyone that they cited as reference in their articles, I went ahead and looked at. I want you to see some statistics from these people. Do changes in oral microbiota correlate with plasma nitrite response? This is a systemic review. This is a study, and it's from the Frontiers of Physiology, January 2021. And in this study, 2 studies found no effect of mouthwashing on changes in plasma nitrites. Okay. Despite having found a marked attenuation after mouthwash, noted that a significant rise in plasma nitrite occurred. Interestingly, this occurred despite the fact that nitrite forming in the mouth was completely abolished by the intervention. Whoa, what is this saying? This is saying that in this study, they used a mouth rinse that completely eliminated the bacteria that reduced nitrate to nitrite. And yet the plasma nitrite level still went up. It increased. Remember pleiotropism and redundancy? Here it is again. So nitric oxide or nitrites can be stored in the blood tissues and used when there is a decreased endogenous production of nitric oxide. So this study, they're saying that nitrites can be stored in the blood and in the tissues and used when they're needed. Hey, that's a good thing to know. More from the systemic review of these authors, okay? These authors, one of them I think did an analysis of all the literature out there. And I've heard people say there's tons of literature out there showing that mouth rinses cause problems with our blood pressure and the commensal bacteria in our mouth that produce nitric oxide. Well, this goes against that. And here's what they have. They found 200 records that were retrieved after the application of the search strategy. After the first screening and duplicates removing, 84 records was done. The 84 records were kept for their title and abstract evaluation. 14 studies resulting from this step were selected for full text examination. In other words, out of the 200, only 14 were found worthy of real text examination. Okay, this doesn't say there's a lot out there. The types of mouthwashes used in these studies were different. Nevertheless, all of them contain chlorhexidine. Every one of these studies. McDonough in 2015 found that Corsadil increased blood pressure while vademecum did not. Now, Corsadil is a chlorhexidine mouth rinse, just so you know what Corsadil is, okay? Wolser in 2016 found that chlorhexidine and Cepacol raised blood pressure, but Listerine did not. So already we have two mouth rinses now that were shown not to raise blood pressure, vademecum and Listerine. Okay. And I'm really appreciative that these guys did the literature search for me and distilled it down to 14. Thank you very much for doing that. Okay, let's talk about cetylpyridinium chloride. This is a study by Garcia, and I want you to show you the difference in mouth rinses. You just can't take one mouth rinse and even a mouth rinse within the same company and compare the two for what they do, okay? So here's Colgate Total, which now removed it and took out triclosan and replaced it with cetylpyridinium chloride in their mouth rinse. And you can see their formula 450. So their CPC bioavailability, cetylpyridinium chloride bioavailability index was reduced from 450 to 92 when they actually analyzed it, okay? So from 450 to 92. So even what the label says is not even close to what is actually being used in the tissues. Scope, you can see, was 450 to 135. Colgate Total T750. The 750 goes down to 278. Then you can see the Colgate or the Crest Pro Health, and they seem to be closer to what their label says. 700 was going to 630, and the other one, the second generation, I don't know what that is, 700 to 630. So even a cetylpyridinium chloride mouth rinse, you can't trust even the label to know whether it's active or not, the cetylpyridinium chloride. By the way, if you don't know now, you will know that cetylpyridinium chloride is a quaternary ammonium product. Quaternary ammonium, just so you know, okay? Okay, so that's the title of that article, Antimicrobial Effects of Cetylpyridinium Chloride Mouth Rinses by Garcia. And here's the summary, the abstract from that. And you can see the results show that the clinical antimicrobial efficacy of the commercial CPC mouth rinses cannot be predicted by the formula dose or by label medication alone. In these studies, the mouth rinse containing high bioavailability of CPC at 700 was Crest Pro Health. Okay, all right. All right, here's another study. A recent company online discussion. I went to a seminar, and I want to talk about people that are now trying to design your microbiome for you. Okay, I want to just talk to you about some of the dangers I see. All right. In a recent online discussion, the head of a new company said they can actually target one bacteria, P. gingivalis, and eliminate it completely from the human body. I had a little micro debate online with this scientist, telling him his bacteria, he says, has no value, I believe is wrong, and that we do not know that it may be needed. So those who enter the brave new world of having the ability to actually determine what microbiome balance can be present are actually entering a scary world, in my opinion. The microbiome has both pleiotropic and redundant aspects, just as does the cytokine system. This means a plaque and a mixture of microbes, including the yeast and viruses, by the way, nobody's talking about that. And the proportions for them may do the same thing as another plaque with a different mixture and proportions. It may turn virulent depending on the environment, the health, the host, the age of the host, the genetics of the host, the different proportions of the mixture. So I think people that think that, I mean, first of all, we know that some bacteria in the presence of other bacteria change from commensal and complacent bacteria to becoming virulent bacteria, depending on which bacteria they're associated with and how many they have. Okay, so let's just talk, make sure you understand that this biome, this microbiome in the mouth and the gut is very complex, and a plaque that is stable and not planktonic is also different. I'll talk to you in a minute about this. So in 27 sites in 7 to 9 healthy adults, the microbiota on 4 occasions, these results indicate that our microbiota was personalized. Well, we've said that before. And by the way, that micro discussion with that online person was from this company called Keystone Bio. I'm not just denigrating the company. I just don't think this is the brave new world I want to see. I'm not sure that P. gingivalis might have some purpose in some places in our body. I don't know that you can make a blanket statement that it's always bad for you. By the way, nobody's talking in these microbiome balances about viruses either, and yeasts, which are just part of our microbiome. Everybody's supplementing with bacteria. Nobody's talking about supplementing with viruses, but here we're going to talk about that. We also note that the alternative sources of nitric oxide play in each individual. We further note that not all subjects require high concentration of NO-forming nitrite reductase to achieve a healthy blood pressure. 5 subjects in quadrant 2 have a nitric oxide forming reductase, and this is a statistical ratio, but have a resting systolic blood pressure of less than 110. We predict that these subjects are producing sufficient endogenous nitric oxide or have other blood pressure regulating mechanisms in place that are bacterial NO independent. Okay, here we go. Pleiotropism and redundancy all over again. And that's from that same Frontier article from Texas, by the way. Very nice statement. So just an aside on gum disease, by the way, and about, you know, I've read many studies where periodontal disease does increase your blood pressure. So every product has, including any mouth rinse, has advantages and disadvantages. There's pros and cons. There are benefits and there are problems with every therapy, whether it be an oral pill you take or a mouth rinse or even washing with soap. Okay. While only an association, this particular article, not a cause and effect link, was established here, the findings suggest that about 50% of adults could have undetected high blood pressure due to gum disease, a tissue infection that can also lead to inflammation, bone loss, and tooth loss. So many of these rinses that we're villainizing and saying this bad oral hygiene are could help us reduce blood pressure because of these factors of gum disease. So think about that as well. You need to balance your thoughts. Here's a study, actually a paper from England, and I want to go over this real quick with you, talking about balancing our oral microbiota with mouth rinses, okay? And so this is what they came to conclusion. In the red here, it says, in this way, they may have, these are called mouth rinses, more selective mode of action in which they mainly inhibit the growth and metabolism of organisms implicated in disease, while leaving those associated with oral health relatively unaffected. Okay, they're saying that mouth rinses can balance your oral microbiome, and so did the Texas study. And the second here, they say, unlike the principles behind antibiotic therapy, or killing off one bacteria, I would like to add, oral care products could function prophylactically to stabilize the normal oral microbiota. So more support that actually mouth rinses can balance your oral microbiota. These few articles on this subject, the N values were low. In other words, the number of participants. So you need to, these are some conclusions that I'm going to draw you to now. Even experts have come to no conclusion on the effect of the disruption of microbiome on nitric oxide levels and blood pressure. Almost all articles show chlorhexidine is more problematic than other antimicrobial rinses. Other antimicrobials, such as Listerine and Vatimacum, showed no effect on blood pressure. A few authors noted that the body can adapt to nitric oxide deficiencies, and long-term data gathering were not done in any of these studies. Redundancy and pleiotropism is present again. They exist in all NO pathways. No study on any rinse can be applied to another rinse in these studies. They must be studied separately. Many rinses have substantivity such as cetylpyridinium chloride and chlorhexidine. They could be quite different from effects of other rinses that do not bind to tissues. Okay, this comes from this study from Norman Horde. Closing. In the centerpiece article from the Frontier article from Texas, there were no exclusions for participants already using antimicrobial rinses every day. In this article, tongue cleaning was determined to be more of an issue than was the rinse. In this article, paradoxical results of lowered blood pressure was not adequately explained. No control on antibacterial toothpaste were considered in this article. No consideration as to hydrogen sulfide lowering of blood pressure was considered. Many mouth rinses actually removed that. And also, no consideration was made to whether any of these patients suffered from sleep apnea and hypoxia conditions when they're sleeping that might produce more nitric oxide. And this study, I'm going to talk about viruses in just a second here. This particular scientist is talking about nasal pathways to viruses and the discovery that we need our nitric oxide from our nose. So more closing facts. This is from another writer. Hi, Dan. No one is talking about viruses and microbiome. So Dan explained that, and I agree with him. Here's this article that he wrote: bacteria infecting viruses in the gut microbiome linked to cognition. And this is Dan Robitsky. And he found this: nasal breathing lowered the increase in blood pressure during exercise with nasal dilators in. They don't know why. I think it's because nitric oxide is released more. But they're also saying that viruses have a play and in this thing. And I'll go over this. Let me just go back a minute. In this one article, by the way, I have it summed up. I should have summed it up here, but I'll just tell you what it said. In this article, they found that one phage, a phage is a virus that infects a bacteria. One of the phages in the gut of our body, when it was there, caused people to be smarter. And another phage that was in the gut, it was in the back, in the gut. Another type of phage was actually lowering our cognitive abilities. So when we're talking about balancing microbiome, no one's talking about or supplementing viruses, yeast, as well as bacteria. They're all just talking about bacteria. People are playing around with things I don't think they know enough about. So what should people be saying as a conclusion to this talk that I'm giving? Antimicrobial rinses can balance the oral microbiome. Good oral hygiene includes mouth rinsing and generally good hygiene practices. Mouth rinses are not all the same. There are more studies supporting their benefits than negative side effects. And by the way, we have no studies on oral care in this arena yet, okay? Just so you know. Periodontal disease raises blood pressure. Chlorhexidine has more negative side effects than any other mouth rinse. People should not repeat inflammatory interpretations of study results without reading what they actually say. Scorched earth statements about mouth rinses are irresponsible and reckless. Hardly anyone is mentioning viruses, yeast in global statements about oral flora balance, by the way. And then this is important. Planktonic flora and biofilm flora are different. Tongue scraping creates a planktonic type flora that reacts differently to rinses. In other words, if you have a thick plaque on your tongue, it's not planktonic, where the individual bacteria are exposed. They're coated, okay? So they react differently to mouth rinses than these people that did the tongue scraping and created a planktonic flora, okay? Just so you understand. So good luck. I hope that you enjoyed this lecture. I hope it made some sense to you. I think you'll be able to talk to people about mouth rinses more intelligently now. I think this needs to get out because there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of scorched earth statements that are really irresponsible. Thank you for your attention.